Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at API Gateway. So what is API Gateway? Well, basically, it's a fully managed service that makes it easy for developers to publish, maintain, monitor, and secure APIs at any scale. And I want you to think of it basically as it's basically a doorway into your AWS environment. So within a few clicks of AWS Management Console, you can create an API that acts as a front door for applications to access data or business logic or functionality from your backend services, such as applications running on EC2, code running on AWS Lambda, or any web application. So API Gateway is just a front door, sort of like a load balancer in some regards, in that it's going to distribute traffic across multiple sources, but it's quite different in that you don't need EC2 instances behind it. API Gateway is basically a doorway into your AWS environment, and typically you'd use it to communicate to Lambda functions. You can use it to communicate to EC2 and other things like DynamoDB, etc. So let's have a look at this in action. So we've got our users, and our users do a call to our API Gateway, and our API Gateway is basically the front end or the front door to our whole AWS environment. And depending on that call, that could then be passed to Lambda, it could be passed through to an EC2 instance, or it could be writing something to DynamoDB. So that's how API Gateway works. In terms of what it can do, well, it can expose HTTPS endpoints to define a RESTful API. It can serverlessly, if that's a word, connect to services like Lambda and DynamoDB. It can send each API endpoint to a different target, so you can have different API endpoints pointing to different things. It runs efficiently with very low cost. It scales effortlessly. We at A Cloud Guru use API Gateway. We've been using it since its very inception. So right now, if you're watching this on the A Cloud Guru platform, your browser is literally communicating with API Gateway. And we don't, in terms of scaling, it just scales automatically. We don't have to worry about auto scaling groups or anything like that. It literally just scales automatically along with your traffic. And then you can track and control usage by using an API key. You can throttle requests to prevent an attack. So sometimes attackers could try and flood your API to try and cost you lots of money or to try and take it down. But you can actually just throttle requests to stop people from doing that as well. And you can connect it to CloudWatch to log requests for monitoring as well. And then you can also maintain multiple versions of your API. So you could have a test and dev API, which is separate to your production API. In terms of how you configure it, we are going to go and do this in the next section of the course. But what you have to do is just go in and define an API or a container, and then you define the resources and nested resources within it using URL paths. And for each resource, you basically select the supported HTTP method. So this could be GET or POST or any supported HTTP methods. And again, we're going to go and do this in the next section of the course. You then set up your security, and then you choose your targets. So what if you're getting a GET request to this particular API endpoint, where is it going to go? Is it going to go to EC2, to Lambda, to DynamoDB, etc.? And again, don't worry if this sounds a bit overwhelming. The best way to learn AWS is by getting your hands dirty, so we will be doing this in the next section of the course. And then you can set requests and response transformations as well. So how do you deploy it? Well, you basically deploy API Gateway to a stage, and it uses the API Gateway domain by default, so it's going to have its own domain name, but you can also use a custom domain name as well. So you could use acloud.guru or api.acloud.guru. And it also now supports AWS Certificate Manager for free SSL or TLS certificates. So you can use HTTPS with API Gateway. And you get those certificates for free if you've been using Certificate Manager to register your SSL certificates. In terms of what you need to understand for the exam, the first thing is around API caching. So API caching in API Gateway is a way to cache your endpoint's response. With caching, you can reduce the number of calls made to your endpoints and also improve the latency of requests to your API. And when you enable caching for a stage, API Gateway caches responses from your endpoints for a specified time to live or TTL period, just like what we saw in CloudFront, and that's always going to be in seconds. And then API Gateway then responds to the request by looking up the endpoint response from the cache instead of making the request to your endpoint. So let's have a look at how that works. Got our user 1 makes a request to our API Gateway. It then forwards that, maybe it's a GET request, and it sends that on to Lambda. Lambda goes ahead and gives a response, and then you've got your second user who does the exact same request, and API Gateway has cached that now, so it doesn't go to your Lambda function. It just sits in the cache and it returns the same response to the user. So another thing we need to talk about in terms of API Gateway is around cross-origin resource sharing. And in order to understand cross-origin resource sharing, we need to first understand the same origin policy. And this is a really important concept in web application security model. Basically, under the policy, a web browser permits scripts contained in a first web page to be able to access data in a second web page, but only if they both have the same origin. In other words, only if they have the same domain name. So one page can talk to another page provided that first page has the same domain name, and that's called same origin policy. And this is basically done to stop other, malicious websites from attacking other websites. It's sometimes called cross-site scripting. Another thing to remember that this is enforced by web browsers. However, some tools like Postman and curl do ignore it. So all this is done to prevent cross-site scripting. However, when we look at things like Amazon, we are always using different domain names. So when we're using S3, we're using the S3 domain name. When we're using CloudFront, we're using the domain name for our CloudFront distribution. When we're using API Gateway, we're going to be using the API Gateway domain name. And this can be more of a hindrance than it is as a help. Now, the way to turn this off, or the way to allow our different AWS components to talk to each other, is using CORS. And CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. And CORS is one way that the server at the other end, not the client code in the browser, can relax the same origin policy. Cross-Origin Resource Sharing is a mechanism that allows restricted resources, e.g. fonts, for example, on a web page to be requested from another domain outside the domain from which the first resource was served. So CORS is a way of a web page in one domain being able to talk to a web page in another domain and request resources from it. That's all it is. So let's have a look at how CORS works. So our browser makes a HTTP options call for URL, and options is just a HTTP method, just like get or put or post, etc. And then the server returns a response that says these are the other domains that are approved to get this URL. And then you might get an error message, and sometimes it will say origin policy cannot be read at the remote resource. And if you see that error message, this basically means you need to enable CORS on your API gateway. So this is critical going into your exam. If you see something where it's talking about origin policy cannot be read at the remote resource, it means that CORS is not enabled on your API gateway. API gateway essentially is not able to go and request that information from the other side. So don't worry if this is all overwhelming. We're going to go into API Gateway in the next section of the course. We're going to start using it to build serverless websites. Just remember, in terms of API Gateway, my exam tips. So just remember what API Gateway is at a high level. It's essentially a door to your AWS environment. Remember that it has caching capabilities to increase performance. So you can cache common requests. They're cached for the length of the time to live that you specify, and that's always going to be in seconds. Remember that API Gateway is low cost and it scales automatically. You don't have to worry about auto scaling groups or anything like that. API Gateway will always scale depending on what settings that you put on it. And if you are getting attacked, you can throttle API Gateway. So you can throttle API Gateway to prevent attacks. So it does scale automatically, but you can throttle that scaling. You can log all your results to CloudWatch with API Gateway. And then also if you're using JavaScript or Ajax that uses multiple domain names with API Gateway, just enable or ensure that you always have enabled CORS on the API gateway. So CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. And just remember that CORS is enforced by the client, so it's enforced by your browser. So that is it for this lecture, everyone. In the next lecture, we're going to have a high-level look at what kinesis is and the 3 different types of kinesis. We're then going to go on and summarize everything we've learned in the applications section of the course, and then we're ready to move on to the last section of the course, which is our serverless part of the course, where we're going to build out some serverless websites. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.